continuing coverage of the 2017 VLN series. This is race number 5. It's 6 hours. I'm John Hindhaugh, and alongside me, just to my right, is Paul Truswell. The news from the Eifel Mountains is that after a beautiful morning that has seen a quality grid of cars in what, let's not forget, is essentially a national race, we've got a bit of rain. And rain on the Nordschleife doesn't tend to stay a bit of a rain very long. It's about 14 degrees Celsius, and the grid, or grids, should I say, grids are beginning to form up around different parts of the circuit. It's overcast, Paul. And the weather that we have now, as the guys are getting ready on the various parts of the track for their rolling out, is pretty much set in for the day and for the duration of this one and only 6-hour race in the VLN this year.
Yes, I mean, I'm not sure that it's actually going to continue to rain for the whole of the 6 hours. Just having a quick look at the weather forecast, and it is supposed to dry up after about 2 o'clock. It's just 11:15 local time at the moment, and it's starting to spot with rain. It's not torrential rain, just spots of rain, typical kind of Eifel Mountain drizzle in a way.
Exactly so.
I'd say typical for August, but it's certainly not warm by any stretch of the imagination either. 15 degrees. That is set to be fairly consistent across the whole of the 6 hours of the race. But hopefully the rain will dry off. But of course, the challenge is for the drivers and teams is to decide, A, do we start on wet weather tyres? Do we start on slick tyres? Because it's not necessarily damp all around the track.
No.
But on the other hand, you've still got about 45 minutes before the race begins. They'll then have around 45 minutes of the first stint before they make the first pit stop. So perhaps start on wets and change to slicks at the first pit stop if it's dried out, or make an early pit stop.
Problem is, Paul, it's 20 minutes before the start of the formation lap,
yeah.
And then another 20 minutes before they get round to the green flag. A lot, as we know, a lot can happen in that time. You're right about the temperature, though. Everybody down on the grid at the moment have got jackets on. It's not short and T-shirts weather as it is over in the UK at the moment. Certainly down in London, 27 degrees Celsius forecast for today. A rather brisk 14 degrees. The Eifel Mountain greeting this 6-hour event. We have had a 6-hour race here this year, but it wasn't part of the championship.
It wasn't a VLN race, no. It was the Nürburgring 24 hours qualification race. If any of you were listening to that, and you're thinking, yes, we did have a 6-hour race. I'm sure we did. Well, yes, we did, and I think it was John and I who sat through it.
It was.
But it wasn't a VLN race. It was the 24-hour qualification race, which meant we had a lot more of the GT3 cars. We've got 16 GT3 cars entered in this race, but still, as John was saying a moment ago, a very strong entry of them, and some very big names participating as well in this race. And just one person down on the grid wearing a grass skirt, hardly grass skirt weather.
No,
but
I'd take exception to that, frankly.
I think he was probably doing it for a bet.
You hope so, anyway.
Can't see any other reason.
Martin Ragginger was top of the times in the qualifying this morning with another mildly impressive 8 minutes 10.1 seconds, literally fractions ahead of Renger van der Zande in second place. Both SP9 cars, of course. 8:10.110 for Martin Ragginger, 8:10.116 for Renger, 8:10.686 for Romain Dumas out in the 911, the number 911 Porsche, and then massively half a second further back, 8:11.987. But the top 20, considering, as I said, Paul, that this is effectively a national championship. This is not an international race, nor is it a world championship. But the top 20 drivers that qualify would grace any international championship.
Very much so, and of course, whilst it is only a national event, it does have these qualification aspects to it, even the VLN, because in order to get your Nürburgring Nordschleife license, you have to have participated in VLN racing. And perhaps it's worth making the point now, because we might forget later on. We've got Tracy Crone participating in this race, who is having his first race here, and I suspect Sadly, we haven't got the ability to talk to him, but I suspect if we did, then he would have a little bucket at the back of the garage somewhere, and a little item in that bucket saying Nürburgring 24 hours, and this is part of Tracy, I suspect. Just starting off, and he's going to tick that one off perhaps next year, by which time I think he'll be 63. Which makes
plenty of racing
like,
in him there.
People like Uwe Altzen and Bernd Schneider puts their efforts into perspective a little bit.
Paul, for those of us who didn't have the wherewithal in our youth, starting a racing career in your 40s, 50s, or 60s is not the bounds of possibility, though.
There might be somebody in this room. And we are in a small room. Just one point on those times that John was reading out a moment ago, 8 minutes 10 for Martin Ragnar and for Renger van der Zande in qualifying. Before we start getting too excited about those 8 minutes 10, this is a slightly shorter Nürburgring Nordschleife, or Gesamtstrecke, in that when they go onto the Grand Prix loop, they don't do the whole of the Grand Prix loop. They do a shortened version of the Grand Prix loop where they don't go all the way down to the Dunlop curve at the bottom of the hill. They do a cut through just after the S's. So they do the full Mercedes arena from the Grand Prix loop. So that's a little bit longer than you would get for the Nürburgring 24 hours, for example, where they use the little hook chicane. But they don't do the full Grand Prix part of the circuit. They do a cut through and only do about 2/3, 3/4 of the Grand Prix loop before going out on the full Nordschleife. There's no cut throughs on the Nordschleife. You have to do the full Nordschleife, but that's why those times, 8 minutes 10 on the front row of the grid, are a little bit quicker.
On Channel 1, Radio Le Mans, and RSL Extra, Channel 3 on our player, as well as in Sounded Vision on the radiolemans.com website. There's a handy link from the front page with pictures of cars on the Nürburgring, which is the giveaway really for you to get to this live and exclusive commentary. No breaks, no geo blocks. Settle yourself in for the next 6.5, 7 hours or thereabouts. Smashing way to spend a Saturday, and cars beginning to roll out onto the circuit now and either go round to the starting grid. Some of them have been going out onto the Nordschleife, but that will be presumably to form up on the Dottinger Ruhr.
Yes, there's 3 start groups, as there are for all VLN races, and they basically split the field into the 3 chunks based on classes, of which there are far too many for us to go into. They kind of create extra classes for all sorts of things, and they'll have those 3 start groups, and so they go out into those separate groups in order to take up the starting positions for the 3 separate groups. Worth pointing out, we've got 2 new cars here in the shape of the new Mercedes AMG GT4 cars here this weekend, which certainly will be interesting to see how they go. But they are not running in the SP9, or sorry, the GT4 class, which is the SP10 class, isn't it? The GT4 class. They're not running in that class. They're running as SPX cars. The 2 Mercedes, one being run by Black Falcon, the other one being run by Uwe Altzen's team, but in effect they are both AMG test team cars, and they are the 2 Mercedes AMGs. If you spot them on the stream, they're cars 52 and 54. In fact, depending which live timing screen you're looking at, which are also available on the various websites, they don't necessarily give you the car type, so it's 52 and 54 are the 2 SPX class cars, but they're running, basically this is the Mercedes running their new GT4 car in preparation for a full season next year. So Mercedes trying to get themselves slightly ahead of the game on that one.
Yeah, and that is a car, GT4 it will be the new GT3. We've spoken about this before, Paul. That is the expansion area for GT racing as the investment required for GT3 gets ever more restrictive for gentlemen drivers. GT4 cars I'm sure will become certainly national and possibly even regional level. That will be the level of the Pro-Am category.
I think you're probably right, but there's a little piece of me that thinks, I'd like to see the GT3 cars. Same thing happened when, cast your mind back to when we had GT1, and GT1 eventually got trying to price itself out of the market. It's a bit like inflation. It kind of keeps going ever upwards in the same direction. But no, I think you're right with GT4, but I do like the GT3 cars, and there's a piece of me that is sad when we lose a top class.
Well, I don't think we'll lose it, interestingly. Not for a while. I just think that the emphasis will move from GT3 to GT4. Yeah. Things like the Nürburgring 24 hours, where the factories bring the very best and brightest, I'm sure that will remain GT3. We've got a new raft of GTE cars coming next, one of which I was having a look at on Thursday, which was very exciting. And I just think with the situation at the very top of global and European sports car racing, endurance racing, being in prototype category, being a little depressed at the moment, that we are swinging the pendulum back to street-based, although highly modified, of course, grand touring racing. And I'm not sure that's a bad thing, if I'm honest.
No, I mean,
we all love the prototypes, let's be honest.
It's always been a debate, isn't it, between the pure race-bred prototypes and the slightly more street-wise, street-legal aspects of the GT cars. I mean, endurance racing, what one could argue, motor racing in its infancy began with street cars. They developed a street car and then went racing with them. They didn't actually develop racing cars first. So the traditionalists could argue that GT cars and street cars are the birthplace of the sport. But then again, it's all about racing cars, isn't it? And if you're going to develop a car for racing, you don't want to be hampered by any constraint that it has to be road legal or something like that. But it is, I mean, it's good to see the interest not only in GT3 but also in GT4 growing, not only from Mercedes but also from BMW. BMW has a new GT4 car here at the Nürburgring this weekend, the 999 numbered car.
This was the car that we saw prior to its homologation being finalised at Dubai, if I'm not mistaken, the M4 GT4.
Yes, that's the BMW M4 GT4. So 999, that's also, although it's a GT4 spec car, not running in the GT4 class because it's not quite a GT4 car, although it's running in SP8T as opposed to the two Mercedes, which are running in SPX, and work out why that might be, discussed amongst and lucky it's a 6-hour race because we'll be able to discuss
that, yes. The 501 Audi TT, the Müller car, which is one of the lower category cars, has stopped out on the Grand Prix circuit and has its bonnet up as we get a little bit of sunshine onto the circuit, breaking through what are very ominous clouds, and the rain shower that we had when we came on air some 14-15 minutes ago seems to have blown through. None of the cars with wipers on at the moment as they cut back into the back of the pit lane and head back, as we are just about 10 minutes away from rolling the formation lap. It is a vagary, of course, of the length of the circuit here, or should I say it is a requirement because of the length of the circuit here that our formation lap takes a rather unusually long, for normal, in inverted commas, motor racing, 20 minutes. And this is part of the recalibration that you will have to put yourself through for the next 6 hours or so, that allows you, and indeed us, to remind ourselves that we're on the Nürburgring Nordschleife plus a little bit of the Grand Prix circuit as well. It's not a big crowd here today, which is a shame because it's a good entry and it's a strong entry at the sharp end of the field.
But it is a big crowd. It's just that they're not all sitting in the grandstand.
Well, no, that is true. That's even as I was saying that, I was beginning to doubt myself. Yeah, there are fewer people than one might expect in the BMW grandstands opposite the pit lane, but as Paul rightly says, it is easy to spread out an awful lot of people around the circuit.
I'm not entirely sure about my facts here, and I'm not quoting it as a fact, but I've got a feeling that in order to gain access to the grandstand for VLN races, you have to pay, whereas for going on the Nordschleife, any part of the Nordschleife is open for spectators free of charge. So I've got a feeling most of the spectators are either out on the Nordschleife spectating for free, or they bought themselves a paddock pass.
And they're on the grid, right?
And they're on the grid, taking part in the grid walkabout, of which there are a lot more people than there are in the grandstand.
Yes, that's a fair point, well made and beautifully presented, Mr. Trustwell. And we have that age-old philosophical question that the Nürburgring Nordschleife often brings us. If we can't see any cars on the grid, are there in fact any there? Because at the moment, there is no way to see any of the cars. I can just about see the Haribo Bear, which I'm surprised isn't a Minion this weekend. They have brought out their new Minion range. Stuart and Dave featuring prominently there. But we can see the Haribo Bear, but virtually no racing cars. And as I say that, there is a AMG GT just being pushed back into position and requiring the crowd barrier, which is in fact a lightly held piece of rope, just to be moved for a moment. You're listening to, and many of you people watching as well, our live pictures, and thanks to our colleague at Vega for making this possible, the vision part of it possible. And it's Radio Show Limited Network live with coverage of the 5th race in the VLN for 2007. This is a 6-hour affair as the 62 Gigaspeed Porsche comes onto the grid.
A slight change in the performance for this race compared to VLN 4. 6 litres less fuel being allocated for the Haribo Mercedes, about which you were just speaking, John. Porsches, which are kind of surrounding the Mercedes, the number 4 Martin Ragginger Falcon tyres sponsored Porsche is fastest. That's only got a 1 litre reduction on the amount of fuel it's allowed to carry. Now, fuel is a funny thing, and I've kind of had an exchange with Johannes Gauglich about this earlier in the week as to what difference that 6 litre reduction is going to make to Mercedes, because it might just make the difference reducing its range down to 7 laps rather than 8 laps. Now, we're not quite sure whether it will or whether it won't. I've got a feeling it won't, and Johannes kind of said, well, we'll have to just wait and see in the end. So,
well, the organisers are quite keen on making all the fuel stints similar, aren't they? And then this was one of the reasons that we spoke about this earlier in the season for VLN, that they were quite keen in making all of the cars do, roughly speaking, the same amount of, or at least have their maximum of the same amount of laps.
And the way that the regulations work, again, if you're new to VLN or the Nürburgring style of races, they have this pit time limit, which is a minimum pit stop time dependent on the length of the stint that you've just completed. So basically, the longer the stint that you've just completed, the longer is your minimum pit stop time, which theoretically gives you enough time to get the fuel in. So refueling time in terms of actually getting the fuel into the car, which is done through a normal petrol pump, is...
Yeah, so you mimed the wrong thing there, because you mimed two hands pushing in a dry brake instead of the pistol grip.
Yes, quite. Not many people were watching, so I think I might have got away with that one. But the point being that the time that the fuel takes to go in is irrelevant, provided you don't mess around too much, because the time of your pit stop is given by the length of the stint that you've just completed. That applies up until the last half hour, when you last the pit stop time, up until the last pit stop, when your pit stop time is given by the length of time to the end of the race, and then in the last half hour you can do a pit stop as quick as you like. So there's various points along the race where they'll be trying to optimise that position.
And the beauty of that, Paul, is that despite this being only a 6 hour race, that does give the scope for tactical differences, and we've seen it even in the 4 hour races, that people have made different choices, and whether that is go full fuel load and therefore full amount of laps and long pit stops, and then a short splash at the end without changing tyres. And the beauty of that is exactly what you've just said. If you do that and make your last stint a stint and a bit, that means your last pit stop is only the time that it takes to put the fuel in.
That's right.
Sometimes we've seen that work, sometimes it hasn't.
No, indeed.
Other people split it up into 7-lap stints throughout the whole race.
Yes, exactly. I mean, the trouble for VLN is that most of their races are 4-hour races, so the teams are used to 4-hour races rather than this 6-hour race. So for them, it's actually a slightly longer race than they're used to. But particularly with the weather conditions being a little bit uncertain, my feeling is that they're all going to be starting on slicks. So we're not going to be having this start on wets and then make an early pit stop. But if you were to start on wets, then you could make an early pit stop and then kind of start working backwards from the very beginning of the race, if you will. So that is potentially one option that they might take, although, as I say, I think it's probably going to be dry enough to start on slick tyres. Trying to find a good enough shot on the TV monitors that we're getting to see whether there is anybody on wets, but I think the cars that I've seen so far have been on slick tyres. Trying to keep all the eyes on not only the TV pictures but also the other information screens that we've got. But John,
I think it's got to be slicks. I think you'll have sent someone out on a mobile phone to the far reaches of the circuit, or you'll have spotters out there for the better teams, the better finance teams, and they'll be saying, you know, down at, I don't know, Bergwerk or somewhere like that, which is about as far away as you can get. Exmüller maybe, at the far side of the circuit, where the second entry is the old entry onto the circuit.
At Adenauer is always a good place because you can get very close there.
Good point.
The public road gets very close, and so you don't have to actually walk very far. The problem with a lot of the Nürburgring Nordschleife is that you actually have to walk quite a long way when you leave your car to actually get to the racetrack. So having a guy on a mobile phone is all very well, but then getting him back into the car is a bit of a problem.
Yeah, yes. This is definitely this is where my motorcycle would come in. In handy to be able to whiz around. You probably need, rather than the K1600 GT, probably need the GS 1200 and do a bit of off-roading at the same time. The sun has returned through the rather dark and threatening clouds on the start-finish line, and the grid walk is coming to an end. People streaming off through into the paddock at the pit out end of things. It is still quite overcast, but with some blue sky just peeking through. It looks like the renovation work on the castle, by the way, has come to an end. You might have remembered us talking about the scaffolding that was around the castle for the 24 hours. That, for the most part, has disappeared, although there's an interesting construction in the back of the paddock that looks like the start of another roller coaster. I'm sure it really isn't that, and it's something to do with the rock concerts that's been going on here over the last few months. And there's a rather large building as well that it's looks like a covered area that you could do some hospitality or some parking of cars in as well. So when you see the pictures, you will see that that's at the out end of the back of the paddock. But the cars are lining up, and the second part of the grid are being pushed out onto what is effectively the end of the Nordschleife and the beginning of the Grand Prix circuit. The teams are now the only people with those cars towards the end of the grid, and you're listening to live coverage of the fifth event in the VLN series for 2017 on RSL Extra and RadioLeMans.com via the Radio Show Limited network of channels. This the final weekend for a wee while that we've only got one event. Next weekend is ELMS. Excuse me, it's 3 weekends. It's 3 events next weekend. So it is, yes, it's ELMS, it's 24 hours of Portimao, and it's IMSA. And then the weekend after that is another full weekend with Barcelona 24 hours, which has a huge entry, as well as WEC from the Mexican round and another round of VLN. So next couple of weekends we have 3 events, but for now relish and revel in the fact that you have to make no choices whatsoever, and you can concentrate in the live sound and vision from VLN 5. I'm John Hindorf. Paul Truswell is alongside me. Tim Gray is our executive producer, and again thanks to Vega for the facilities and the organisation of the feed, which is working beautifully now. And once again, we would not be able to see around the Nordschleife without their facilities. Grid almost cleared now as we get ready at 20 minutes before the hour to roll the formation lap. Hello to Philip Lane, getting ready to introduce a friend and his mum to the series today, watching live on our feed at radiolemans.com. Nick Holland has tuned in with Richard Santos as well, seeing on RSL_studio. 2 cars at least with 1 driver. Is that possible? No, it's not. There will be a second driver in those cars, I'm fairly certain, Richard. The rules are quite stringent, Paul, about how long you can do in a car. Yes, there are people who are looking for what's called the VLN permit or the Nordschleife permit, which means you've got to ultimately you've got to do about 2 VLN races to get your laps in. I think it's about 16 or 18 laps that you've got to get in a low-powered car under 300 horsepower to start with. But you can't do more than, I think, 2 hours in a stint, can you?
In this race, because it's a 6-hour race, it's a 3.5-hour maximum
in total.
Stint. No, yeah. Maximum stint.
Ah, okay. Right.
The total driving time isn't given. It is based on the fact that you have to do a 3.5-hour stint maximum, followed by a rest period, and I've forgotten what the rest period is, but I think that is either half an hour or an hour. But it's a specific time that your rest period is, rather than in some cases a time which is dependent upon the stint that you've just done. In some race series they have a rule where it's 2/3 of the time of your
half
stint
the time.
Rest time. In VLN it's a specific time, but I can't remember whether it's half an hour or an hour.
And that counts regardless of how many cars you're driving, because we have seen in the past people driving 2 different cars, but the rest, that doesn't mean that your rest period whilst you're out of one car you can use to drive the other.
That's right. No, your rest period must be rest, not driving a different car. It's 30 minutes is the minimum rest time, and the maximum driving time in a single stint is 3.5 hours.
Right, so you could do more than half the race and lay out for a stint and then get back in and do the end if you had somebody old and slow in your car like me and you needed to refresh your position on the screen. Well, just a tad behind time, unusually, we are rolling for the warming up lap, and the rather good news, as I hear the sound of engines in the background, is that the cloud has broken up just a wee bit here on the start-finish line on the Grand Prix circuit, and there is quite a little blue sky visible, and the clouds here are rather more white than grey. However, in the distance and the area from which the weather normally arrives, it is rather dark and foreboding. Should have some serious music playing at the moment, something
a bit Mahlerish, isn't it?
Yes, I was just about to say a bit of Mahler. Very good. Yes.
But, as I say, the forecast actually improves as the day wears on. So I think if we can get through the first couple of hours without any more rain, then we'll be set clear for the rest of the race. The rain itself wasn't supposed to happen until a little bit later. So hopefully the forecast for the rest of the day will be accurate, and we'll have a dry race throughout. It just makes things simpler. There's this piece of me which I just like to get into a pattern of a race, and it's easy to recognise a pattern if the weather conditions stay the same throughout the race. We'll be expecting to see pit stops around 7 or 8 laps, or stints around 7 or 8 laps, but of course the first stint will by necessity be up to a lap shorter because of this formation that is currently underway.
Nicole has tweeted in at RSL Studio, and that's the best place to get in touch with us this weekend. I seem to remember that Audi wasn't really represented in SP9 during the last race due to some dissatisfaction with balance of performance. Is that the case for VLN5?
Yeah, well, we do have a Phoenix car in the race. Frank Stippler sharing with Peter Terting in the number 15 Phoenix Audi. We've also got a Lant Motorsport Audi, which Conrad de Filippi is sharing with Christopher Meese, and I think
is that the 29 car again?
The 29 Lant, sorry, 28.
Ah, okay.
The Lant Motorsport.
And both those cars were in the top 20 of qualifying, by the way.
So they were fairly well up. So those are the two Audis in the GT3 class. We have three Mercedes, 5 Porsches, 1 BMW Z4, 5 BMW M6s in the top class.
Who's with Renger van der Zande in his car, by the way? Renger was just a back of the eyelid away.
That's the Haribo car, isn't
yes.
it? That I don't know.
I did see a name on the qualifying, and then I managed to forget who it was, so right, I apologise.
Okay, we'll work that one out and let you know in a minute.
And Norbert Seidler was listed alone as well in his car. Still a bit of last-minute barrier repair going on, which is...
I was going to say, I think that might be on the cut through where they go through from the Nordflanke, but I'm not sure that that's right, because I think they may be...
I don't think that's on the main part of the circuit, though, Paul. Is that not the pit lane entrance?
Not sure. We can't tell from that.
It's a very tight shot that we're seeing at the moment, but 3 gentlemen, including someone who's arrived very recently on a motorcycle, and because although I know health and safety is important, I don't think you need to wear a full-face helmet to fasten bolts in. Yeah, they are working very quickly. We've got one of the track services trucks there that's got the compressed air line on it, so that they could tighten things up and get rid of the anything sticking out. It's one of those rather splendid Unimogs, and it is indeed on the Grand Prix circuit, just after the S's at the top of the hill. So I wonder if someone's gone off there in the practice qualifying or the warm-up lap and just speared off, and that may be why we were just a couple of minutes late getting the warm-up lap underway. That said, with 20 minutes allowed for the warm-up lap, it will give us an opportunity to catch up, because it just really means that the safety car driver has to get his foot down a little bit. The Bilstein grandstand beginning to fill up from people, no doubt, who have been on the pit walk. Alex Müller is alongside Seidler in the Fricadelli car, and it's Edward Sandstrom and Lucas Stoltz who are with Renger van der Zande in the Haribo car. Thank you to Right Turn Lover for reminding me of that. So information coming through from the collective to @RSL_studio as the BMW 235 grid gets underway. 22 of those the last time I did one of these races, and there's a goodly number of them again here. It's been a huge success for BMW and their M series of cars, a car that was designed, built and marketed pretty much with the philosophy of being in these races. They have leaked out into other championships as well, of course, but we have seen them provide some very close racing here, with major positions being disputed right till the start-finish line in the last few races. Been a lot of fun. So cars moving now, and welcome along if you are just joining us. Your timing is pretty much impeccable as the cars are rolling out onto the Nordschleife for their formation lap with 6 hours on the clock. It's Paul Truswell and John Hindorf doing the talking for you for the next 6 hours and a bit.
Yeah, just to go through the start positions again, Martin Ragging and Klaus Bachler in the Falcon Porsche
strong
number 4 on the pole position. Alongside him is Lucas Stoltz, Edward Sandstrom, Renger van der Zande,
who qualified
in the number 8 Haribo Mercedes, alongside alongside him on the front row. Then the second row is the 911 Manthey Racing Porsche, the Grello car, as we're officially allowed to call it. That's the Manthey
green and yellow,
official
yes.
colour. Grello doesn't work in German, but they still call it Grello. Romain Dumas, Kevin Estre, and Mathieu Jaminet, 3 drivers in the 911 car.
And it was Romain Dumas who qualified that car.
Second row, the grid outside of the second row, the number 99 ROWE Racing BMW M6 GT3, Philip Eng, Marcus Paltala and Nicky Katzberg.
Eng that qualified.
On the outside of the second row. Third row, number 100, the Valkenhorst BMW M6 GT3. Christian Krogners, Michele Di Martino, Matthias Henkeler and Will Stevens, in that car number 100. And then on the
And it was Krogners the Norwegian driver who set the time.
And on the outside of the third row is that Phoenix Racing Audi, a bit about which I was talking a moment ago. The Audi, then Frank Stifler sharing with Peter Terti in the number 15 car, so 100 and number 15, the third row. The fourth row is the number 7 car, the Black Falcon Mercedes GT3, Hubert Haupt, Adam Christodoulou and Manuel Metzger. That car certainly one to look out for, I would suggest. And do
the qualifying drivers have to start the race?
No, they have to be nominated,
right?
But they don't have to be the qualifying driver.
Okay.
And alongside the Black Falcon Mercedes on the outside of the fourth row is the second of the 2 Valkenhorst Motorsport BMW M6s, which is Jordan Tressen, Henry Valkenhorst and Werner Humprecht, which is a pseudonym, in the number 35 Valkenhorst. Then the Lant Audi is the next one up on the 5th row of the grid, number 28 car, Conor de Philippi and Chris Meese sharing the number 28 car. And then on the outside of the 5th row is the fastest of the non-SP9 cars, and this is the SP8 class leader, the Ferrari 458 in the NG colours, Mike Jaeger, Stefan Kohler, Christian Kohlhaas and Hendrik Still driving in the SP8 car, which is for VLN specials, up to 6.5 litres, very nearly. That is the class in which we've also got the Aston Martin Vantage GT8,
lovely car.
134. Look forward to seeing how that car does. It's a great class, that actually, the SP8s. We've got a BMW M3. We've then got a BMW 150, a Lexus ISF, the Aston Martin Vantage and a Ferrari 458.
Effectively, they are GT4-ish cars, but they tend normally to have slightly more aero or something that just takes them out of GT4 homologation. The Aston Martin there, the GT8, of which it is one of one, there's only been one of those cars, is a GT spec car with a bigger wing. And that car, of course, won its class convincingly at the Nürburgring 24 and finished 21st overall.
Great performance from the Aston Martin team, and hopefully they'll be able to do something similar. And
just a little note of congratulations to David King. There's been a little bit of reorganisation at Aston Martin, and particularly at Aston Martin Racing, about how that works. And David King is now the man at the head of Aston Martin Racing, and the racing part of Aston Martin has been taken back under the control of Aston Martin Lagonda at Gaydon, although ProDrive are effectively their nominated supplier of services, if you will. But there had been a joint venture for many years between Aston Martin Lagonda and ProDrive, and that sort of slightly changed the emphasis on that, and David King is the man at the head of that, as well as being pretty much Aston Martin's cricket ambassador as well. If you were watching any of the cricket this summer, particularly with Glamorgan involved, because Cricket Wales and Glamorgan are Aston Martin, part of Aston Martin's regime now, with their manufacturing facility in Wales coming on apace, I am led to believe, at St Asaph. Very big year for Aston Martin. If they are on target this year and next year, they will build more cars than ever before, looking somewhere in the region of 8,300 to 8,500 cars, and that is by far the biggest year they will have ever had.
thought they did that last year, but I might be wrong.
They've certainly done very well, and back into proper profit in the first quarter of the year. It's for the first time for a very long time.
And then this year they're scheduled to make more cars than they ever have.
I think about 13 or 12, they did about 7,500 cars, and they're on course to beat that. Well done to Andy Palmer and the rest of the team at Gaydon, who have been putting in the long hours. And from being a manufacturer that seems to launch a new car about every decade or so, they seem to be doing it every 3 or 4 months at the moment. The new Zagato family of cars being announced. Yes, one of each, particularly the estate car looks lovely. I'm sure it's called a shooting brake, really. And of course the new Vantage, which has its first public appearance later on in the year. Race car and road car being simultaneously developed at the moment for the 2017 Vantage. And with any luck we should have some exclusive content about that car later in the year, coming out on the day that that car is released for the first time, seen for the first time without its camouflage.
I think whilst cars are still making their way around this formation lap, other things we'll be looking out for during the race, John, is the performances in particularly two of the lesser classes. The TCR class, which has become ever more popular as part of the VLN racing, and indeed as part of endurance racing in general. I think just looking down, we've got 9 starters in the VLN, in the TCR class, and the other class that will no doubt provide a very close race, it certainly has done in the other VLN races thus far, is the Cup 5 class, which is the class for the BMW 235i Cup class cars. I think that will be one to keep eyes open for. And then the other class is a fascinating one to me, is the Cup X class for the crossbows. I had a little bit of a joke about this last time with Johnny Palmer about this one, whether we should actually call it the Cup Cross class rather than the Cup X class, but it is officially the Cup X class for the KTM crossbows. But specifically the KTM crossbows from the single make racing for that car. They're not the GT4 KTM crossbow. But those are some of the other things that we can be looking out for over the course of the race.
Just did see red lights still on out on the circuit, although white flags and yellow flags being waved. So I'm not sure what is entirely sure what is going on here. I'll try to find out from the ticker if we are going live, and it would appear that we're going green. It would appear that we would at the end of this. Certainly the drivers seem to think so. The
attitude of the cars coming down the Dottingerhöhe, they are very much preparing for a racing start, and the foreshortening effect of the camera making the cars seem very much more closely bunched than they actually are, but they really do use the opportunity of this final run down the long straight, the Dottingerhöhe, in order to warm the tyres up. The Falcon Porsche on the pole position, the Haribo Mercedes just tucked in behind it, Martin Raginger and Renger van der Zande, the two drivers who will be starting from the front row, and then Romain Dumas and Philippe Eng in the Porsche and BMW. So Porsche, Mercedes, front row Porsche and BMW on the second row, and then BMW and Audi on the third.
Well, Martin Raginger knows his way around this place. I won't say that he could probably do it blindfold, because I'm not sure he could, but he's got a few laps around here. And Renger van der Zande fast in anything. Sunshine on the Dottingerhöhe as the first of the grids come down. As ever, a little bit of a split between the cars, round about 50, anywhere between 30 and 50, depending on how the grid is made up. And the Porsche safety car still with its lights on as it comes into Tiergarten, that tricky little chicane area where you keep your foot in so long coming up the uphill section. So this is going to be a very late dive into the pit lane by the Porsche. Oh, and almost got rear-ended there by Martin Ragginger, the man on pole position, the Manthey green and yellow Grello 911, number 911 with Romain Dumas on the inside of the second row. So Porsches lining up on the inside, driver's right of the track, as the Porsche Turbo safety car is off the circuit and out of the way, and now we're looking towards the lights, which are still red. Now they go green, and we're racing for 6 hours at the Nürburgring Nordschleife, and the pole man immediately goes straight to the pit wall with the Mercedes-Benz fanning out into the middle of the circuit, and then Romain Dumas in the Manthey car, and it's 4 wide for a moment as the Manthey car tries to sweep around the outside, the green and yellow car. The pole sitter with the better line will just about hold on to the lead, but the Mercedes-Benz is on the inside. Guys, there's 6 hours left. What are you doing? And the Haribo car goes through with Renger van der Zande taking the lead there. Had a very, very wide exit from the first right-hander, but managed to parlay that, or sprechen that, I suppose, into a lead. He's still weaving left and right, having been off the circuit and just trying to clean off the tyres. Tyres still a matter of concern here in terms of who's doing what with whom and which tyre brands are involved. Audi, remember, rather controversially changing tyre suppliers during the 24 hours, and already a problem, and that is the number 1 Porsche. Oh my goodness. Bad damage to the front left-hand side. The 56 car involved as well there, Paul. Excuse me, the 30 car. That's the Abelen car.
The Fricadelli car,
yeah.
Sabine Schmitz's car, which Klaus Abelen was starting, I think, the Fricadelli car number 30. Frenetic doesn't begin to describe that start, does it? So it's Mercedes, BMW, Porsche, Porsche, BMW in the top 5 places. But certainly the way that Renger van der Zande took off there at the start, he was so committed to leading that race. I thought as he was coming down to turn 1, he just wasn't even going to come through at all. He finally managed to kind of get the car to come around the right-hander and join in again. But having lost out, he then fought back and got back into the race again, and is leading as they go out onto the Nordschleife. Start group 2, meanwhile, John, just coming up through the Tiergarten chicane now to take their start some 2 minutes after the first start coming up now.
And on the front row, outside of that front row, is one of the Porsches with the K3 body kit that is available now. You'll have seen this, I'm sure, advertised. It's the number 600 car, and it looks absolutely brilliant in the Conrad style colours of the light blue and white, and the green lights are on for these cars, as the mostly Porsches at the head of that grid, Caymans as well as 911s, and that K3 replica effectively. Yellow flags waving mightily as they go down to the first corner, which I presume is where, yes indeed, the conflagration was at the back of that, or the middle of that first start group, with the Abelen Porsche and the number 1 car, the number 1 being I think has been moved off to the side of the road. The 30 car is still sitting in a very precarious position on the outside of that first downhill right-hander.
Yes, and so the start route 2 then coming through, and as you say, you're having to face the yellow flags immediately, but of course that's the danger of having the start route 2 coming through, because they know that there is a possibility that something will happen with the first start route that could affect their run into the first corner, and that was the case there, where no sooner were they given the green flag than they immediately had yellow flags to contend with.
Not necessarily the worst thing around here, just to calm people's nerves a little bit. So the leaders are well out on the Nordschleife. We can't see them at the moment, as the second group, which has become a little fractured in terms of that with that yellow flag, the 600 Porsche in second. Now there is a third group, and this is with the BMW 235M racing cars behind a road-going version of that said car.
It's almost entirely Cup 5, I think, in
Correct.
Group 3. certainly the first group of them are all Cup 5 class cars.
And I think the first non-BMW there is the Manta Foxtail, which is out, and I know that will please an awful lot of people. Has become a massive fan favourite down through the years. Possibly the car with the most Nordschleifer miles and laps under its wheels. I'm not going to argue with anybody that tells me that. It has been around for a very, very long time, but it's a bit like Trigger's Broom. It's not always been exactly in the spec that it's in now, and it has been updated mightily. Green flag, bit of a jump start for me from that, but it was the pole man who jumped away, so maybe he will get away with it.
I think there might be a bit of an investigation going on as well, John, in the start Group 2 behaviour as they reach that yellow flag zone.
Which has been withdrawn. Hasn't.
Now have been removed.
Stationary yellow flag at the first corner.
No overtaking at turn 1 at the moment.
Allegedly. Not sure anybody was watching that. These 235s are a great way to get some of your laps in for the VLN or the Nordschleifer permit, but also quite clearly they are running in their own championship as well, in their own class. The Cup 5 category is almost entirely made up of these cars. As I said in our countdown to green, a car that was designed and built, in fact the whole philosophy of that car was about filling a gap and allowing people to get started here. And with the new M4 GT4 here, that is a nice development ladder from BMW now, with the 235 IM and then the GT4 car, then the GT3 car, and of course the GTE car will be making its competition debut at the Rolex 24 Hours at Daytona at the end of January, a race that you can hear live and in full exclusively here on the Radio Show Limited network of channels. Now meanwhile, at the head of the field, the cars will be well around the circuit. Tiny and scoring at the moment, not really playing ball, so we'll give you an update on how things were going at the foot of the field the next time that we get a visual on that. Renger van der Zande Mercedes-Benz making the, or AMG GT should I say, the Haribo car, making the move early on, although not really staying track limits to do that. And van der Zande well out ahead of the rest of the field at the moment. The Ruhr Racing BMW number 99, as they come down towards the Dottinger Ruhr, slotted into second position now, ahead of Romain Dumas in the number 911 Porsche, which would be third position. So what's happened to our Paul sit there? He's in fourth position, Ragginger.
Yeah, Ragginger's dropped quite a long way down.
Oh, battle for the lead, Paul. Sorry to interrupt, but side by side towards the end of the Dottinger Ruhr, just before the bridge and through the Bilstein Bridge. The lead has changed, and the BMW then, the Ruhr Racing BMW, has gone through as they head through to the Tiergarten for the end of lap 1. So Renger van der Zande not able to consolidate the lead that he built up or claimed early on, and it will be BMW that leads at the end of the first lap.
And that was, I'd say, a relatively straightforward-looking overtaking move. But Philipp Eng, then, I think it is, in the number 99 Ruhr Racing BMW, just seemed to do it on pure power getting past the Mercedes. Then, so having made that very decisive and aggressive start to the race for the Mercedes, the BMW came back at him on sheer speed, coming down into the Tiergarten at the end of the first lap. And so it is a BMW that leads from the Mercedes at the end of that first lap.
And three BMWs disputing the minor positions down into the first corner, with the second of the remaining of the Fricatelli cars just sitting in behind them. And in fact, the 35 is just got ahead of them, which is the blue PlayStation car. Then it's the 20, then it's the 3, that's the Falcon BMW. If you're looking on the timing screen at the moment and struggling as we are, our apologies for that. Clearly some issues from the track. 99 BMW having led the first lap. So the 31 Porsche sitting in behind a trio of BMWs at the moment. So it's Eng, Van der Zande, Dumas, Raginger, 5th for Frank Stippler in the Audi, then De Filippi in the Land car, the 28, then Hout, Possevac, the 36 car, Close, and the 480 of Oaks in 10th position. I'm not sure that's true. And there's been a big off just coming on to the Dottinger Ruhr, and yeah, it would be in that sort of area. A car facing the wrong direction, just coming out of or in between the two right-handers that lead onto the Dottinger Ruhr. Meantime, the 31 Porsche still has those 3 BMWs ahead, which seem to keep changing positions, but it is the Falcon car. He's at the end of the Hatzenbach now, and heading down the hill across the wee bridge, and heading up over Flugplatz further ahead. The leaders now down through the Foxhall, Fuchsruhe. Just an amazing part of an amazing circuit. And Van der Zande now looking at the back of Philippe Elging's car as they come to Adenar Forest. The low rumble of the Mercedes engine never seemingly stressed that car's engine. Metzgerfeld give up the middle of the road. There's no need to have the racing line. Late braking as you start to rise up before dropping down towards the long right-hander at Callenhard. Short shift. Big hit to the curb there from Van der Zande. Then those 3 tricky right-handers that are falling away as you go down the hill towards Versiphon. A little hairpin. Get on the power nice and early. Heading down towards the Breitscheid Exmuller area of the bridge. And meantime, already the 31, now that's further back down the track, and that's a slow zone that has been enacted. That's where, no, that was just, that I think, Paul, was Metzgerfeld. Yes, it was, because that's Callenhard that they're coming through now. So that must have happened behind the leaders, because when we saw the onboard from Renger's car, there was no slow zone there, but there was, interestingly, I just saw a flash on the left-hand side of a vehicle beginning to move out on the track, and an exfiltration vehicle. So that must have happened just before the leaders got there. So that's a first lap incident there.
Right, okay, so we'll try and piece that one together. Behind the first 4 instead, we were saying before we were interrupted by that battle for the lead and the BMW retaking the lead of the race. The Falcon Porsche number 4, Martin Ragging, which started on pole, had slipped back about 100 yards or so behind the leading 3, but was still in 4th place. In 5th place behind that was the Phoenix Audi, number 15, Frank Stippler. In 6th place was number 28, the Land Motorsport Audi, Conor De Filippi. In 7th was Hubert Hout in the Black Fountain Mercedes. That's number 7. In 8th place, number 35, the Valkenforce BMW with Jordan Tressen behind the wheel. And in 9th place was the Schubert BMW, number 20. That's the car that Claudia Hürtgen, I think, is driving at the moment. Number 20 in 9th place. And then rounding out the top 10 is the other Falcon Motorsports car, the BMW number 3.
And just to confirm, the Chris Meese Porsche and the Klaus Abelen Porsche, the 1 and 30, came together on the first lap, and
Alex Meese.
Alex Meese, excuse me, yes. They came together very, very early on, and I haven't had any report yet of whether those two cars have rejoined, although they will have been able, if they could move, to get shortcutted back into the pits.
And I think the other problem that you described